Have you ever wondered what the difference between a stiff starter is and a 100% hydration, more liquid starter? Or maybe you don't even know what a stiff starter is. Well, I have something really fun for you today. I did a side-by-side experiment using the same type of recipe, but with two different starters. And I'm gonna show you the results and explain how these different starters are different, how they're useful, and what kind of recipes you wanna use them in. Hi, I'm Jenny Pryor from Living Bread Baker. And yeah, my favorite bread to make for my family for special occasions, Christmas, holidays, birthdays is my cinnamon twist wreath bread. It is this beautiful bread that has cinnamon layers that are wrapped and turned into a wreath shape. And I find that every bite, it just has a different texture, has sweet, it's not overly sweet. So I feel like it's just a really delicious treat, but it's not overpowering. But we absolutely love it. My kids look forward to it every time I bake it. But I have two recipes for this. One recipe uses a stiff starter, and one recipe uses the more typical 100% hydration starter that you might be more familiar with. So first, let me explain how these starters are different and what they are. Many new sourdough bakers are really familiar with the 100% hydration liquid type starter. 100% refers to the ratio of weight between the flour and the water that are added to the starter. For my cinnamon bread, my recipe is about a tablespoon of my most recent batch of sourdough starter. And then to that, I feed it 100 grams of water and 100 grams of all-purpose flour. And you can see the full post for some of the baker's calculations for hydration, which I find really helpful so you can understand what that means. And I also have a resource for you that's a sourdough time planning workbook and has a baker's journal, and there's all sorts of baker's math and worksheets that go along with that journal, which can be really helpful if you're just getting started. Now, a stiff starter, there are many different recipes for stiff starter. It's not just 100%, so it's not as cut and dry as that. But the main difference is that you are using less water compared to the flour. So some hydrations might be 50% or 75%. Because rather than mixing up that milkshake consistency starter like the liquid or 100% hydration starter, you're mixing up a thick dough. So those are the main differences, is that you're gonna have a different flavor profile, and even the way that the bread is going to ferment is gonna be different, and you're gonna see that come to life in this experiment. So to give more control over this experiment, I tried to make the hydration levels as similar as possible. So you'll notice in the full write-up in the blog post that the ratios are really close. Like once you calculate out how much liquid is used in the recipe and factor in milk versus water, there's only 4 percentage points differences between the two different doughs. Every other ingredient is about the same, except that one recipe is gonna have that stiff starter and one has the 100% hydration starter. So you can see in this mixing process, even the mixing process looks a little bit different based on the starter because of the consistency. And then we're gonna see, this is my process of mixing the dough. I always like to mix the dough ingredients without the butter. I like to add the butter last because that's gonna allow the dough to gain more strength, and the fat is added very last thing. So the gluten can develop more evenly, the dough strength can develop more and be stronger dough before we add that butter in. So now that both batches are mixed, they're mixed about the same time. I put them both in their own Cambros. Next time I would like to have the same size so you can really see the difference in fermentation. But using what I have on hand, so each one has its own home. One is going in the red Cambro, the 6-quart, and one is going in the green topped, the 4-quart Cambro. So these both had time to ferment. You'll see I'm poking the tops to really check that fermentation, make sure that they are fully fermented, seeing how they feel, looking at the texture, because it's not just the volume, we want to look at texture. There's a few posts I have, videos about looking at when something is done with bulk fermentation to really know when it's done. So both these are done. I can tell by the texture, I can tell by the volume and the way it feels. So now it's time to shape both breads. Now, while there were some differences I saw after the bulk fermentation, I saw that the one with the more wet starter was a little bit less puffy. It had more of a soft, more relaxed look to the dough. Had different color. It was a little more white. The dough with the stiff starter is a little bit more yellow in color, is a lot more puffy and aerated. So they're kind of acting a little bit like the original starters. The 100% one being a relaxed, more liquid-based starter, and the stiff one being more that thick, aerated starter. So even just those differences even with me changing the recipe and making sure they're as comparable as possible, we're still seeing those differences come through even at this stage. Now the shaping part is where I really saw differences between these two types of doughs. So as I was shaping the one with the 100% hydration starter, it was a little bit more sticky, a little bit looser of a dough to work with. And the cutting part is probably the most tricky for this one because the knife had spots where it would drag a little more. I really had to be more precise on the cuts to cut through the dough since it was a little bit wetter. The consistency was different. The dough felt a little bit heavier, but still made a beautiful shape. The shape isn't quite as beautiful as you'll see in the next one. So made my shape, it looks pretty good. Put it to the side for the proofing process. Now for the stiff starter dough, this dough shaped really beautifully. It hardly stuck at all. And then when I was cutting through the dough to make my twist and then make my wreath shape, I noticed how nicely it cut through the layers. The layers have really defined cuts because of how well the dough was able to be cut with a knife. There was no dragging. You see how nice the shape looks. Like you compare them both and you see that the one with the stiff starter has a much better shape than the one with 100% hydration starter. So then I let these proof at room temperature. After the proof, they both, had more volume, but the way that they proof was different. The one with the 100% hydration starter spread out a little more than up. The one with the stiff starter spread up a little more than out. So you can see those differences. And then because I was gonna bake this for Chris this morning, I covered them and actually put them in the fridge to rest for the night until the morning time. In morning, I had them come out, let them sit at room temperature for a little over 30 minutes so you can temper a little bit more before I bake them. And I was wondering about baking them at different times, but I decided to bake them both at the same time so I could compare them in real time since they were done proofing at the same time. So I did see those differences in the proof, but after the bake, that's when we really got to have the fun part of tasting it and seeing the finished product. So you can see here, both breads are gorgeous. Both breads look delicious and were well enjoyed by everyone. But a few differences I can see here are that the 100% hydration dough, has a little bit more of a wet consistency inside. Some parts of the dough aren't very even inside the interior crumb. A little bit more of a wet look to the dough. And this bread also I've tasted more of the sour hints, which still tastes delicious. It didn't taste like San Francisco sourdough bread or anything, but it still had more of the sour notes in the overall flavor of the bread. Now the stiff starter one, you see the shape is really big and high and bold. And this one, you can see that the crumb is a lot more even. There's the holes in the crumb, the texture of it is almost like a cake, the way that it fermented and baked. And this one was beautifully flavored. It still had a complex flavor. I love sourdough because you're never tasting something that just tastes like yeast, because there's flavor just that builds and builds over that long fermentation time. So it didn't have quite the sour profile as a 100% hydration starter. It had more of a sweet, complex flavor, but just that lighter texture was what I really sold it for me. So my bottom line is that both recipes, both methods can create beautiful breads and even work for sweet breads, even if you're working with the 100% hydration, creating that more of the sour flavor from the acids, more acids created. So both are great. If you find a recipe that you are enjoying that uses one or the other, keep going. But if you're looking at trying a new recipe and you really want to try an enriched recipe, or you're going to try to make your own recipe, my recommendation here is to use that stiff sourdough starter. It's worth the extra time and effort to get the beautiful results that you're going to get in your sweet breads, whether it's a donuts or brioche bread or something like this twist. But if that's still unfamiliar to you, 100% is still going to work great. But I just want to show you the differences so that you can learn and understand what these two starters do, what difference they're going to make in your bread. But I really hope that you enjoyed seeing this experiment and seeing not just learning the differences between these two starters, but seeing them in action and seeing what it creates on the post end. So let me know what you think in the comments. Have you used a stiff starter before? Are you just getting started? I would love to hear from you and help you understand more of sourdough. And I'm excited to bring you more content about sourdough recipes, but also some of the nuts and bolts of what makes sourdough special and some of the science behind it. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this video, please like it, share it, subscribe to this channel for more of the videos that I'll be putting out. And I can't wait to see you next time. Have a great day and enjoy connecting through bread.